Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to ALFALAND. I'm your host Arttu Nyman and I'm sitting here with Dr. Mike Israetel. Welcome to ALFALAND.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a
How
pleasure.
are you, man?
Pretty good, pretty good. I'm a little jet lagged, but nothing I haven't been used to for a while, so yeah.
First of all, you're the star speaker here at the Finnish Exercise Testing Symposium, organized by the Finnish Society of Sports Science. How does that feel?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'd call myself the star speaker. I'm one of a few, but
Okay.
it's always great to talk to folks who are interested in hearing what you have to say and potentially use the stuff you say to enhance their training and the training of others. So it's a real pleasure to be able to go to places and contribute something positive, maybe, or maybe it's just bad jokes. I don't know.
True. First of all, I want to thank you for making hairy back sexy again.
I'm trying.
You're the reason, man. You're bringing it back. It was gone for a while, you know.
Yeah,
Everyone was doing
since
that.
the 70s.
Yeah, everyone was doing that stupid shaving shit.
Yep.
But you're bringing it back.
Well,
it looks great.
Thanks.
I found you a few years ago on Juggernaut.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that impressed me was that you made you made your nutrition, the nutrition pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
There was some kind of genius in that simplicity that you made it in. I'm a firefighter by trade, so I need simplicity. You know,
Sure,
we have a saying in the firefighter community that when you make something firefighter friendly, that means even firefighters can understand what you're talking about. And you made the nutrition the nutrition pyramid made that for me. Can you just go through that for me to make me sure that I understood it
Sure.
right?
Well, we'll find out. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, we got around to the first thing we made, and when we were publishing through Juggernaut, was actually, it wasn't even a pyramid. It was like a cup of water that's filled to various heights with various nutritional priorities. What we got to there was, we were doing a lot of research to try to help our own clients at Renaissance Periodization on how to make sure that their diets were somewhat close to optimal for enhancing their body composition, losing fat, gaining muscle, and also enhancing their performance as athletes. And what we quickly started to find, and this is confirmed by our own personal experience, is that some parts of diet, some features of diet, are just way more impactful than other features of diet. So, for example, if you look at how to get lean, what's more important? Do you eat, how many calories you eat per day? Or do you eat 4 meals per day or 5 meals per day? Well, some people would say, nutrient timing is really important, or they would say, these specific supplements are must-have for fat loss. When you look at the data and even just personal experience, some of the stuff like timing and supplements, it just don't make that big of a difference. You could have people losing weight and fat on 4 meals per day and get excellent results, and you can have people lose weight and fat on 7 meals per day, excellent results. It's very difficult to tell them apart. But then you look at something like calorie balance. If someone's eating more calories than they burn, they're just not losing fat, almost ever. And it doesn't even matter how they get to the calories, but if they eat fewer calories than they burn, everyone loses fat. So when you're starting to look at, okay, how can I change my diet to make sure that it's effective, you probably want to start with the stuff that really makes a big difference first, right? And it's like if you're building an army or something like that, you're a new dictator of a country or something, you probably want soldiers first, and then maybe some basic tanks and airplanes before you start installing some kind of satellite laser system that may or may not work. So the basics come first. So for diet, that means, first of all, making sure you're feeding your body with the appropriate calories for your goal. which, if it's fat loss
Now,
and weight loss,
Are we talking about just diet for fat loss and weight loss, or is it the same thing for athletes?
so it's very, very similar for athletes, but the numbers are a little bit different. But athletes who want to diet for fat loss and weight loss is definitely a thing. So sometimes gymnasts and wrestlers and other individuals will want to become lighter. And in order for them to become lighter and drop to the next weight class lower, they have to eat fewer calories than they burn. If athletes want to support a high level of performance but stay relatively the same weight, they should eat approximately as many calories as they burn per day, which just means they eat a certain level of calories. If their body weight starts going up, they eat less. If it starts to go down, they eat more, and they keep it in that range. And then if you want to gain muscle and gain weight, you should be eating more calories than you burn. And that's the most important principle in sports nutrition by a long shot.
So both for people who are looking to get lean, people who are aiming for performance, the most important thing, or they have the same pyramid. So the
Very
calories,
similar, yes. So the calories are the basis for everybody. And then after that, you get to the macronutrients. So calories account for maybe 50% of all the differences between diets, which is a really big deal. Then macronutrients maybe account for 30%. And for people who want to get lean and maintain their muscle, protein is the most important of the macronutrients, so you should consume some decent amount of protein, probably something like between 1.5 and 2 grams per kilogram body weight per day. And being very consistent about that is a really good way to ensure that you're building muscle and or that you are not losing muscle if you're losing weight. And then for athletes, it's a very similar number. It starts to depend a little bit more on the sport, but protein is critical for both athletes and people who want to get leaner and more muscular. Carbohydrates come next in the macronutrients. Carbohydrates are not super important for people who are trying to get lean. They are pretty important for staying not so hungry and having really good training energy so that as you get lean, you don't lose too much muscle and you lose mostly fat. But you can eat a relatively high-fat diet as long as the calories are good and you're eating enough protein, and you can still lose a lot of fat. Athletes, on the other hand, are almost always well-served to try to nearly maximize how much carbohydrate they get within the allotment of their calories and their protein. So athletes should probably prioritize protein first and then eat lots and lots of carbs, keep fats relatively low, because fats really are not a very good performance fuel. And as long as you get a minimum amount of them, your hormones and everything like that are fine. So eating a lot of fats probably doesn't pay for athletes. And then fats are last in the macronutrients. You can't have zero fats because your body needs essential fats, not only just to survive, but also to optimize hormones and performance. And then after you get a minimum amount of fats, they don't have a ton of really impressive benefits, so mostly lower fat diets are pretty good for athletes. Higher fat diets can be okay for people who are trying to lose weight.
And what would be a lower fat diet?
Well, something like around 0.6 to 0.8 grams of fat per kilogram per day. So if you weigh 100 kilos and you're eating between 60 and 80 grams of fat per day, that's considered a pretty low fat diet. If you start eating 100, 120, 140, that's moderate, higher fat diet. So all of those macronutrients, if you get roughly those values throughout your average day, then you know that you are doing a pretty good job on that front. And because it's so important to get those macronutrients, with calories and macros, you're probably up to about 80% of everything you'll ever get out of a diet, which is a really interesting thing. Somebody could say, well, hold on, that means that you haven't talked about nutrient timing at all. So you could eat 2 or 3 times a day, or you could eat 7 times a day, and either way you still get at least 80% of your diet effect. And the answer is absolutely yes. So a lot of common question I get, I do one of my sports that I participate in and compete in is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, grappling. And folks in grappling will ask me, what do you think about intermittent fasting? Which is, when you don't eat for a long time, then you eat 1 or 2 meals a day, and then you repeat the process. And I tell them it's fine. It's not optimal for athletes, so there's a 5 to 10% they're missing out on, which could be better with multiple meals. But it's not the end of the world, and sometimes people are surprised. Oh, I thought you were supposed to feed your body all the time. Well, if you have enough calories per day, you really are feeding your body. And if you're having enough protein, carbs, and fats to meet your needs, you can have as few as 2 to 3 meals per day and be pretty close to really well off in your sport performance. Yeah, if you have 1 meal a day, you're probably doing 70% of all the best stuff you could. But then the other question comes up. Are you ready to be a competitive athlete if you're only doing 70% of what it takes to be the best? And that's when the smaller parts of the pyramid towards the top start to fill in. Probably 10% of variance in performance and body composition is explained by nutrient timing. So how many meals a day do you eat, and when and where do you structure those meals, and how much proteins, carbs, and fats do the meals themselves have. And there's nutrient timing is relatively simple. You should probably have, for optimal results, 4 to 7 meals per day. They should probably split the protein relatively evenly between the meals, and the meals should be split relatively evenly throughout the day. So every, 3 to 6 hours you have a meal. And you should probably have more carbohydrates before training and after training, and fewer carbohydrates at other times of the day. And then you take your fats and you put more of them at those other times of the day, not around training. Protein's relatively even. That's just about most of nutrient timing. If you do that, then you have very few other things to do with your diet that are going to impact it. Very interestingly, for body composition and for athletic performance, a variable called food composition is actually very minimally impacted or impactful to performance and to composition. Food composition is, okay, we know we're supposed to be having some amount of protein, carbs, and fats. We know we're supposed to be having some amount of protein, carbs, and fats per meal. But what about where that protein comes from, where the carbs come from, where the fats come from? Is it okay if I have just shakes versus is it whole food that I'm supposed to be having? Do I have to have brown rice, or can I have Gatorade or like just pure table sugar? Do I have to have my fats come from almonds and nut butter and olive oil, or can it just come from butter and cheese and bacon? The very interesting thing is that for health, food composition makes a significant, large difference. Probably 20% of your health is determined by composition. But for performance, for athletes, and for body composition, how lean or how fat you are, food composition probably only accounts for roughly 5% of that variance. It's a very small amount.
Yeah.
Supplements and hydration make up the other 5, and there's your whole 100 between calories, macros, timing, food composition, and supplements and hydration. But only 5% for food composition just sounds crazy, right? I mean, everyone's been hearing athletes need to eat healthy foods and all these particular foods, but if you get your calories and your macros straight and you get your timing logical, the kinds of foods you eat don't matter all that much for performance and body composition. And one of the ways in which we had a hint of that early on before the formal literature was really accumulated is real athletes, they don't eat all that healthy all the time. It would baffle you to see what real athletes actually eat. And they're performing right, exactly.
Yeah.
I've been around a lot of real athletes as well, and sometimes you're like, what? Really? You're eating that?
Yeah.
But their weight is stable, so by definition their calories are set. They're usually eating enough protein and combination of carbs and fats to at least meet minimal levels, and they eat at least a couple of times a day. And so when it comes down to food composition, there really aren't that many magical foods that will allow you to have these huge improvements in performance. And real-world athletes are a testament to that. Now, health is different, so it's very important for us to mention that if you want to be long-term healthy, which athletes should, because if you want to compete a long time in your sport, you should be healthy, then food composition really does make a difference, and a pretty big difference. And then where you want your proteins to come from is primarily lean protein sources. Your carbohydrates should come mostly from vegetables, fruits, whole grains, in that order. And your fats should probably come from healthy fat sources, olive oil, various nut butters, nuts, avocados, things like that, as opposed to, like drinking bacon grease or something. So that's definitely a factor, but it would be incorrect for sports scientists to say that you have to eat super healthy if you want to perform in the next couple of months.
So would you say that the pyramid changes for health?
It's a different pyramid.
It's a different pyramid. Where would you put the food composition in that pyramid?
So in that pyramid, in the health pyramid, which we have published through another book called Understanding Healthy Eating, in the health pyramid, calories account for the bottom part, the biggest part. It's actually 60% in that one versus 50%, because calories, your body weight has a lot to do with your health. And there's not, exaggeration. The next biggest factor for health is not how much macronutrient you take in. It's not proteins, carbs, fats. It is actually food composition.
Okay.
So the two most, and that gets you all the way to 80%. So the most important thing about being healthy is keeping your calories in control so that you have a healthy body weight, and making sure that most of your foods, whatever combination of them you eat, come from the healthy sources. Lean meats, lean protein sources, veggies, fruits, whole grains, healthy fats. And it's kind of, maybe not obvious, but it's intuitive just from observing people, that that's probably the case. You take a look at who's healthy and who's not healthy. Is it vegans? Is it paleo people? Is it, people who eat various 50 different kinds of diets? Well, who is it not? It's people who eat too much that are way over fat. Those people are not healthy. And even if they don't eat too much, people who eat a lot of junk food, that food composition is really off, a lot of saturated fats, a lot of very, very high sugar foods, they tend to be not as healthy as well. Now, combining excessive calories with all those foods is definitely the way to get the worst possible health. And you start to look at who are the people that are healthy. Is it, imagine that we said that macronutrients were the most important thing to health, or the second most at least. And imagine we made the claim that high protein diets are essential for health. How would we explain vegans, where they consume relatively low protein diets, sometimes very low protein, and are some of the healthiest people in the world?
Yeah.
And then if you said, okay, well, so too much protein's bad, people who follow the carnivore diet or the paleo diet or the low carbohydrate diet, even the bodybuilding diet, some of the healthiest people in the world as well, and they eat lots of protein. And the direct studies on protein say there's not really a top-end amount that's unhealthy if you have functioning kidneys. So all of a sudden, it seems like macro is very important for performance, very important for composition, but for health, it's a very big range of macros that are acceptable. What is really important is that most of your food comes from healthy sources, and what is essentially important is that your calories are under control.
Okay, so let me see if I got this right. Today, it's not a perfect day for nutrition. Okay, I got up early this morning. I went to the gym, had my classes. I run a CrossFit gym, so I was having classes there. I did my training, but I only got to eat my breakfast. Okay, so the day, nutrition-wise, isn't gonna be perfect. Now, if I should aim for something for today, for my athletic performance, it would be the calories, right? To get my calories in.
For sure. Calories number one.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And then try to optimize the macros,
specifically protein intake.
The timing is fucked already, but
sure. Well, depends on how fucked.
So,
But you've had breakfast. It's a little bit towards the middle of the day. Maybe if you eat relatively soon, you can have a midday meal. And if you eat again in the evening and maybe again as a midnight snack of high protein, that's 4 feedings per day. You're doing pretty well for yourself. What you could do is say timing is completely fucked and just not eat again the entire day, or eat just once and have a bunch of pizza. Yeah, you'll hit your calories, but you'll screw up everything else.
Yeah.
So I think at any point, if you have messed up your day so far, at any point when you say, okay, let's try to maybe not fix this, but do as good as possible. Okay, calories are the first goal, protein is the next goal, and then trying to get a good number of meals to keep feeding in carbohydrate as well. And then you're off to a pretty good start.
Good. Sounds good. Talking about CrossFit, you've been working with CrossFit athletes like Rich Froning, the Mayhem team, Annie Torres-Dottir. I'm very much into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well. I know you've been working with Uriah Faber, right? And a bunch of other MMA guys. Do you find any similarities that's wrong with athletes' nutrition plans when they come to you?
That they do wrong?
Yeah. Or is there anything that's very common for them that's going to be a first line of what you're going to prioritize in their nutrition?
Yeah, I think sometimes it depends on the athlete. A lot of times you want to introduce a different degree of formality to their eating. This is not for all athletes, just some. They're relatively good athletes and they come to you and you say, like, so what are you eating? Like, how is your eating? And they'll say, they give you a typical day. You're like, okay, and, how many macros do you eat? Proteins, grams, carbs, and fats. And they're like, well, I don't really keep track of that. And it's like, okay, do you keep track of how many points you score in your matches? And they're like, of course. Do you keep track of the record boards for CrossFit? Of course. And like, those are all numbers, right? Probably a good idea to keep track of some numbers for yourself. Yeah. Sometimes we ask if they keep track of their body weight, and they'll say, yeah, I do when there's like important times for me to make weight, but otherwise I don't. A really good athlete should probably stay aware of their body weight most of the time, most of the year. So one thing we bring to the table at Renaissance is we start to have athletes think of their bodies a little bit more like machines and less like humans, because machines are better at sports than humans are. If we were all tanks, it would be better off, right? So we start to help athletes formalize their eating so they're hitting certain macro and calorie targets. And we try to get them to go away from eating when they're hungry, because sometimes, you have a day like today where you only eat breakfast and then, I don't know, stuff happens. And, stuff happens to regular people. To athletes, you don't want your life in nutrition to be a stuff happens approach, because then when you lose your next tournament, you don't qualify for the CrossFit Games or whatever happens, you don't tell your fans, well, stuff happens, right? If you have a competitor in a sport and you find out that the competitor measures their meals and eats specific foods all the time, that's scary, because you're like, gee, that person seems real dedicated. I don't know if I want to compete against a machine like that. So we try to get our athletes to eat more regularly, eat 4 or 5 times a day, sort of every 4 to 6 hours, as opposed to just when they feel like it. We try to get them to hit specific macros. Once we have that level of control that they're taking for their diet, we can start to manipulate the carbs and the fats and the proteins up and down to reach certain goals. And then that's kind of the third big picture that RP introduces, is it's not just the traditional athlete approach of I eat good food, and most of these folks eat pretty good food most of the time. It's not just I eat food and I train and stuff happens. It is, what are your training goals? How can we use nutrition to optimize them? And then how can we use nutrition to bring you to a competition weight, so that you're not just eating and training, you're doing it with a purpose. Just like if you're launching a rocket into space, it might have multiple stages of that rocket, and one falls off, the other one starts, versus just saying, like, how do you get a satellite into space? You say, well, you just, the stuff comes out of the bottom of the rocket, it's a lot of stuff, and it goes up real high, and then the satellite goes. Hopefully the satellite goes where it's supposed to. It's supposed to be more of a meticulous process. So for example, a CrossFit athlete may need to gain a certain amount of strength in their repetitive lifts, like the squat reps, their clean reps, their pull-up reps might need to go up. How do you do that? Well, you put on more muscle, especially once you're a mature athlete. There's no way around getting more reps other than just getting more muscular. So you, instead of them just eating food and eating protein and training, they do all that, but they make sure to eat a little bit more food than they want to slowly gain maybe 3 or 4 kilos over a 6-month period. Why is the nutrition important with that? Because you did something you didn't necessarily feel like doing. You ate more than you were supposed to. That resulted in 3 or 4 kilos of gain. A lot of that was muscle. Now you take that new body weight and that muscle, and then you eat in a certain way for a couple of months to stabilize performance at that weight and allow that muscle to really sort of sink into the physiology so that it doesn't just fall off. Then when you figure out where you need to be with your ideal body weight for a CrossFit competition, you diet down for several months to that body weight, and then for at least 4 to 6 weeks, you maintain at that new low weight to, get comfortable. Because, like, if you gain 5 kilos, the rings feel weird. Your kipping pull-ups feel weird. You lose another 2 or 3 kilos, things start to feel normal, but you really want a couple weeks in your new body, your competitive body, to get used to how you move. Because even racking a clean changes a little bit. You sit down in a clean, it's a little weird with 5 kilos here and there. Once you're at that new body weight and you're really ready to compete, you're lean, you're mean, you've kept all that muscle you gained with the first stage booster rockets earlier, and then you go and compete and you have this amazing competition, and then people ask you about, how did you improve in such a short time, just a year, and you jumped up 10 placings at Worlds or something? How did you do that? And you think back and you go, you know what? I did it incredibly purposefully. It was a willful effort. I didn't just go and, you're a CrossFit coach, I assume, right?
Yeah.
So you don't just go train people. You do specific exercises, you do specific time limits, you do specific techniques. CrossFit is not about going in there and just doing whatever. It's about
it used to be that in 2009
but
and whatever.
all those people, they can't compete with modern CrossFit athletes. They can't even compete with modern regionals competitors. So it's a purpose-driven training. Why wouldn't it be a purpose-driven diet?
Exactly.
And a lot of the times, back in the days of wrestling and other sports, all the training was very purposeful. You know, when you do a single leg, you do it like this. You don't do it like that. You have to tuck your hand in. And then once practice was done, the athletes would say, "Okay, coach, what do I do?" And I just go eat. And they'd be like, "What do I eat?" They'd be like, "You know, just eat food." Like, what, man? Isn't it a
Whatever
good
your mom
idea to
cooks you.
control that,
Yeah.
right? Like, really, like we're spending 10 hours in the gym per day trying to win the world championships, and then we're going to leave our Olympic gold medal on the table because of mom's cooking? No thanks. You know, if I want to be the best athlete I can be in CrossFit and mixed martial arts and everything, I want to make sure that I do as good of a job as I can and control everything that I can. That doesn't mean you need to go nuts and lose your mind. And there's, in the off season, there's definitely time for relaxing and eating pizza and ice cream and dipping your pizza into ice cream. Totally
Wow,
fine.
I didn't get that
That's
way.
right, next level stuff, right?
I got to try that.
Really relaxing.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh, this is gross. What a stupid idea. So there's a time for relaxation, but especially as the competition nears, you want to start to more tightly control all the variables, because at the end of the day, people don't care why you didn't win. Who cares why you didn't win? You care why you
Yeah.
didn't win. And you might as well control as many things as you can control. How many athletes will think back to their last season of preparation when they have a silver medal in their hand and think, yeah, on the one hand, I have a silver medal, but on the other hand, I got to eat a lot of fun foods whenever I wanted. Who gives a shit? If I can rewind time back, I'll eat like a machine if I have to, if that's what it takes to win. And nowadays, because athletes are controlling their nutrition more and more, your best competitors are probably watching their diet more than ever. Probably pays for you to watch your diet more than
Exactly.
ever, too.
So if a CrossFit, because CrossFit is a very carb fueled sport,
Yeah.
and so is MMA, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well. Would you, when they want to cut weight down to a specific body weight, would you do it from the carbs, or would you go like?
You do it from the carbs when you have to, and when you have to means you've already cut as many fats as you can, and cutting
So
them
first would
anymore
be the
will
fat.
be absolutely.
Okay.
And there's a term from bodybuilding folk that applies really well here. It's a little bit, it has some connotations that aren't great, but I think it works pretty well. Cleaning up the diet, I'm sure you've heard it before. Cleaning up the diet means something to bodybuilders, but what we can take from it as other athletes is you take your food and you essentially increase how much nutritious food you eat and decrease how much junk food you eat, maybe not to zero, but somewhat. The result as far as macronutrients is almost always that your carbohydrate levels are relatively stable, but your fat intakes come down closer to that minimum range of fat that you need. All of a sudden, because your fat intake has come down, you've cleaned up your diet, what happens is you're now at a calorie deficit just automatically from just eating clean, so to speak. And once you start eating, you know, still lots of protein, lots of carbs to fuel training and support recovery, and your fats are lower, what ends up happening is because you're in a calorie deficit, your body starts to lose weight relatively steadily, and voila, you're in shape. Another really, really big factor that we try to push at Renaissance is athletes sometimes wait until way too close to the competition, find themselves way above body weight from eating just crap and lots of fatty foods, and they'll cut everything, fats and carbs, in order to really rapidly drop their weight, which causes lots of fatigue. It doesn't make you optimal at your performance for that weight. What is much better is to start way earlier, months ahead of time, and slowly lose fat. And slowly doesn't mean taking forever. You can lose up to 1% body weight per week. So if you weigh 100 kilos, you can lose 1 kilo per week. That's a good pace. And over 8 weeks, get down to 8 kilos, and then all of a sudden you're where you're supposed to be in your weight. Then you coast, you're lean, you're performing well, and guess what? Because you're maintaining, you get to eat lots of carbs and plenty of fats too, because maintaining is way easier than trying to cut calories. Specifically for sports like CrossFit and MMA, your training throughput, right, how much total training you do, is massive. High-level CrossFitters, which I'm sure you've seen train, they train like 4 or 6 hours a
It's
day.
crazy, it's
So the
crazy.
thing is, for them, if they want to lose weight and lose fat, all they have to do is just stop eating junk for like 3 or 4 weeks. They lose like 1.5 kilos a week.
Not dipping their pizza into.
That's
Nutella.
it. Just eat the pizza, leave the ice cream alone.
Just
But
start
let's
with that.
Stop dipping.
Yeah.
So basically, it's that easy. Instead of waiting until 3 weeks before your competition, cutting your carbs and your fats, starving yourself, and having crappy performance, why don't you start 12 weeks out from your competition? just stop eating a bunch of junk, reduce fat intake substantially for 8 weeks. You don't have to cut any carbs. You lose a bunch of fat, a bunch of weight. You'll be at your competition weight and you're good to go. Here's the thing, carb cutting is mostly for people that don't train much. Listen, like if a guy, at the firehouse or something, not everyone as a firefighter trains as hard as they should.
No.
Maybe some people train
We
very
know that,
minimally.
yeah.
Or let's say somebody in the administrative side, someone who runs the firehouse or a secretary or something. They might have almost no physical activity in their life. If they want to lose weight, they have to generate a very high calorie deficit to do so. And their deficit isn't going to be generated by exercise. It's going to be cut from the diet. So for them, are they going to cut carbs or fats? Like probably both. Probably a lot of both. But when Annie, Thor's daughter, what is it, Thorsdatir is how you really say it? Yeah, it's like good old Icelandic
You don't know,
language.
I don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
It's hard.
So when she has to cut body fat and body weight, because she trains so much, all she has to do is take how much peanut butter she eats, cut it in half, and all the 600 grams of carbs or whatever she eats per day can be completely untouched, can continue to support training, and she'll lose tons of weight just because she trains that much. Same for MMA people. It's all about not waiting until it's too close and having to make the crazy cuts. Starting early, getting the cut done nice and steady, your performance never declines, and everything goes super well.
Sounds good. That's fireman friendly. I can understand.
For sure.
Yeah. You have a way of putting it in a very simple.
I just think it's because I'm not that smart, and it has to be simple for me to understand it. If it was any more
That's
complicated,
that's the way I
understand.
understand. Try to make things too. I found that you don't do regular cardio. You train jiu-jitsu for cardio. How does that go together with the bodybuilding? Because sometimes bodybuilding can be very strenuous on your muscles, and how can you manage that? I mean, you talk a lot about maximum recoverable volume, and how do you manage your recovery while combining jiu-jitsu and
Sure.
bodybuilding?
Well, they have a regimen of nutrition and sleep and supplements that maximizes my recovery to begin with. For example, I'm here in Finland for a couple of days giving talks at this conference. Myself and the other folks, Gabrielle Fandaro and James Hoffman at RP, we're staying in the same Airbnb. We don't go out. We go to sleep. Why? Because we're very dedicated to our sport performance, and we have to get a certain number of hours of sleep. So we're very dedicated to our nutrition. So when we come to Finland,
What's the amount of sleep for you?
For me personally, 8 to 9 hours on a regular basis per night. If I start to get less than 8, it's like clock starts to wind down until I have a nervous panic attack or something. But, for me, I can't do the 7 hours all the time. Sleep is really, and my colleague, Dr. James Hoffman, is here talking about recovery. He's much more apt on this, but sleep is a very personal thing. But when you're not getting enough. If you need coffee to stay awake, you're not getting enough sleep. The red kind of itchy eyes feeling like you do at 2 p.m. If you get that consistently, just fact, you're not getting enough sleep. To survive as a human, sure, you're doing fine.
Yeah.
To optimize your athletic performance, you're not doing fine. So first of all, I make sure that my recovery strategies, sleep, nutrition, supplements, etc., are all in order and as good of a job as I can do it. But secondly, I know my maximum recoverable volume very well. I know it through theoretical basis. I know it through a lot of experimentation. I know how many hours down to how many rolls in jiu-jitsu I can recover from per week, along with my normal bodybuilding training. So when someone says, hey, do you want to come to my jiu-jitsu class tonight? I figure out, okay, actually, no, I can't, because I won't be able to recover from my other stuff. So I don't just do jiu-jitsu and do bodybuilding. I dose everything incredibly tightly to make sure that my total volume, my total maximum recoverable is here. I make sure that jiu-jitsu plus bodybuilding never adds up to more than that. And it means that I have to approach training very diligently. It means, for example, sometimes I come to a class in jiu-jitsu, I do 5 rolls because, 5-minute rounds. I feel good. I want to do a 6th round. A buddy of mine just showed up. I want to roll with him. I don't. I go home. He says, hey, do you want to roll? I said, I'm good. I can't. And, in jiu-jitsu, everyone's real respectful. Nobody in jiu-jitsu really says, like, come on, man, you should roll. Like, that doesn't happen. It's like when you say, hey, I'm not going to roll, you're not going to roll. Why am I saying that? Is because I don't feel like rolling. No, I feel like rolling. I know too damn well that if I take this one roll, it's going to cost me in my bodybuilding training too much later. And so I have to keep everything nice and tight and make sure everything fits in my maximum recoverable volume. Lastly, I do in fact do cardio in addition to jiu-jitsu when I'm dieting hypocalorically, especially when I'm doing a real hard diet. But it's not much cardio, it's very little. It's like a total of, an hour and a half per week of elliptical. So who cares? It's way easier than jiu-jitsu. But I will say this, a lot of folks ask me how I balance this. The way I balance it is I know I'm not going to be the best bodybuilder I can be, and I know I'm not going to be the best grappler I can be. Anytime I go up in competition against other jiu-jitsu grapplers, I could have better technique, but I'm not in the jiu-jitsu mats enough because I'm spending so much time in the gym doing dumb shit like this. And when I go on a bodybuilding stage, I know I'm giving up points and I'm giving up physique from little injuries, a lot of fatigue accumulation, an inability to push as hard as I could with a better recovery in bodybuilding because I'm doing jiu-jitsu. But I'll tell you what, I'm one of the most jacked guys on the mat at jiu-jitsu, which feels great. And if push comes to shove in the back of a bodybuilding stage, I'm ready to grapple. We're all covered in oil. That's a huge advantage to me already. So that's no-gi. That's a Tuesday night.
Yeah.
But, I think one of the things is people try to do multiple sports and they think I'm going to be the best at both of them. Well, not so fast. No. You might still be the best at both because you're a genetic freak, but compared to what you could be if you did one or the other, you're never going to be as good as you could be. So accepting limitations is a good idea.
Do you find that the thing you're doing on the elliptical helps your recovery?
No, because I do enough cardio on the elliptical that it just costs me energy.
Oh,
I would be better off just sitting at home and eating.
Yeah.
So it's for fat burning. I think recovery cardio has to be less intense and even less volume. So something that helps recovery as far as cardio isn't even cardio. Going on a 20-minute walk, doing the elliptical for 10 minutes, just a brisk pace, just feeling it out a little bit, that promotes recovery. I do more than that, even though it's not much more, probably triple as much. But anything more than that, it starts to be a net recovery cost rather than a benefit.
Yeah. No, I understand you very well in that sense that you're very methodical and you approach it in a very good way, that you're managing what you're doing. You know how much you can work. You know how much you can roll, and you're not going to go overboard.
Sure.
But there's the problem I see people having, because there's always this debate of should I combine, for example, jiu-jitsu and CrossFit? Well, if you're going to a regular class of jiu-jitsu 5 days a week, and then you're going to a regular class of CrossFit 5 days a week, you're gonna go overboard.
Yeah.
It's gonna be very hard to manage that. But finding a way to combine them is the key, as you have.
Sure.
In bodybuilding, it might be a little bit more easier to count your maximum recoverable volume, because you're keeping
exact track, certain number of sets,
weights, all this. But for someone who is doing, for example, jiu-jitsu or CrossFit or something else, which is not that tracked of sets and weights and this, is there any other tools that you can use?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What would be the...
Great question, first of all. Second of all, basically you have to do a series of self-experiments, and here's how they go. It takes some self-control, as do most things in life that are productive.
Me, yeah.
But I
Okay.
have a camera for him.
Yes.
Can you stop touching the table?
Okay.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Strict Russians.
Yes, it's hard for me. It must have been hard in the Soviet Union. You're from.
Yeah, we're all scarred from
Yeah. And I'm getting scarred
Exactly.
now.
Second order scars.
Yeah.
So basically, you have to run an experiment on yourself over and over, and here's the experiment. Takes a lot of self-control, but here's what you do. You start with an amount, let's say it's jiu-jitsu and CrossFit. You start with an amount of jiu-jitsu and CrossFit per week that you know damn well that you can recover from. 2 CrossFit sessions a week and 2 jiu-jitsu sessions a week. I mean, for sure, you're fine.
Yeah.
Do that for a couple of weeks to confirm that you're okay. Treat it as more vacation. You know, relax more with your family, see some sights, go on some trips. 2 CrossFit sessions a week, 2 jiu-jitsu sessions. Then, for a couple of weeks, try 3 CrossFit sessions and 3 jiu-jitsu sessions. See how you're recovering. How is your performance? You don't have to measure your performance to know if you suck or not. Are you hitting PRs? Are you hitting your times in CrossFit that you're supposed to be? If you are, all is well. In jiu-jitsu, are you having productive athletic roles, or do you feel like you have, like, what does my colleague James Hoffman say, dicks for fingers? You know, you're just like, fucking, I can't grab it. I didn't even know what's going on. Like, you get swept and you're like, I don't know how that happened, right? So if you're performing super well, then apparently you are recovering from 3 sessions of each. Try 4 sessions of each for a couple of weeks. Maybe at 4 sessions, you're going to start to notice that your recovery is getting close to a limit. Like, you're still performing, but at the end of each week, you're like, oh my God, this is tough. You're getting close to your maximum recoverable volume. A couple of weeks later, you may try, maybe after you take a week of easier training to really drop some fatigue, come back and work up to 5 sessions of each, 5 CrossFit classes, 5 jiu-jitsu sessions. After a couple of weeks of that, you may find that your performance starts to go down. Like, you're just breaking into pieces. And you're not getting hurt, but in the CrossFit arena, you're not hitting PRs, and you're actually just starting to lag behind in classes. Like, the coach is like, dude, you okay today? And you're like, I don't know, not really. And then in jiu-jitsu, you're starting to suck. You feel less mobile, less athletic. Your hips start to feel off. You're getting swept way too much. You're not, like, you do one move and you get into one position. Usually you fluidly enter into the next one. You start to get into one position, and you're like, okay, side control. Okay, what do I do? Okay, Kimura armbar. Okay, I forgot
something.
Right, it's just total lack of athleticism. And I say, okay, maybe it's because I wasn't sleeping so well this week. Maybe it's because I wasn't eating. Maybe this is the 5 and 5 is just temporary. Go back to 3 again of each, then come up to 4, then come up to 5 of each. If at 5 of each nothing happens and you're still good, go to 6 of each, or just 5 of one, 6 of the other. See if you can survive. But if at 5 again you start to fall apart, now you kind of know something above at 10 sessions a week total is somewhere where your limit is. What does that mean? Does that mean you train at 10 all the time? No, that would be too much. So maybe you could start at 7 or 8 total sessions between CrossFit and Jiu-Jitsu and try to work up again to close to 10. And at some point, you're going to find maybe between 8 and 9 is the most training you can do and still be productive. That may mean your average optimal training will be between 6 and 7 sessions per week, and that with 4 or 5 sessions, you're actually getting more recovered every week, and it's not enough to make you that much better. So now you know that you have a golden zone of 6 to 7 sessions a week, and every now and again you can push it to 8 or 9, back off, get a delayed response to get better, and that's how you're going to run your training. So if someone asks you, hey, why don't you do 10 sessions a week total, 5 CrossFit, 5 of Jiu-Jitsu, you can say, I've tried that 3 or 4 times, and I can't recover from it. But then It doesn't have to be, you don't have to track stuff. You just have to see, how am I performing in the gym, both in CrossFit and in Jiu-Jitsu, and if you notice that a certain amount of training, your performance starts to go down, there's no point in fighting that reality.
What about tracking something like HRV or
Those tend to be, so heart rate variables a lot of times are what we call lagging indicators. They'll tell you you're overreached like 2 weeks after you started being overreached. It'll be one of those things where when HRV tells you that you suck, you'd be like, well, I could have already told you that.
Yeah.
You'll have like 3 workouts in a row which you suck, and you're like, okay, for a while HRV could actually be normal, but you still suck.
Yeah.
What fundamentally is what's important? Does it matter what your heart rate variability is to some fundamental level? If you win Abu Dhabi, trials, does it matter that your HRV was who cares?
Yeah.
If you're not performing in Jiu-Jitsu or if you're not performing in CrossFit, that's what matters. I would say track performance first. In addition to that, you can track your sleep. Like if you're having trouble falling asleep, if you're waking up in the middle of the night and you can't fall back asleep, your desire to train. If you train excessively for a while, you start to really just not like training. Someone's like, hey, you going to Jiu-Jitsu today? And you're like, I guess, right? Sometimes you're just being lazy, but if it's consistently that 10 total sessions per week, if you start to feel like you don't want to train anymore, even if your performance is still good, that probably means in a week or two it's not going to be good anymore. That's a leading indicator for going over your maximum recoverable volume.
So what's the optimal for you right now? Combining jiu-jitsu and bodybuilding.
My sessions are strange because I train like 9 or 10 sessions per week in weights, but they're not all super hard. Like a lot of the sessions are sort of PM sessions later in the day where it's like biceps and shoulders, not big muscle groups, and it's not legs and chest and back. And so total for me, I've got probably my max is about 15 sessions total, jiu-jitsu plus bodybuilding, 15 per week. That's my maximum recoverable volume. My productive volume is somewhere between 8 and 12 usually. So that means for me, a very good week is 9 sessions of weights and 3 to 4 sessions of jiu-jitsu. That's a solid week. And then anything less than that, I have no problem recovering from. It's probably not enough to be optimal. So those are my landmarks. But, I've engineered my entire way I live my life to have those landmarks. Here's another concern. I'm a purple belt now in jiu-jitsu, and I'm really strong for jiu-jitsu. That means most of my rolls, I don't have to try that hard if I don't want to, and I still have a great technical roll. If you're a white belt or a blue belt, sometimes rolls take a lot out of you because you don't have the technical background to be able to fluidly move away and things like that.
And it has a lot to do with ego too.
Emotions, right? You feel like every roll you're like fighting for your life. Purple belts don't fight for their lives anymore. You get submitted, you're like, oh, you got me. It's not a personal thing at that point. So for me,
I'm still struggling with that, but
we all struggle to some extent.
I've been doing it for 20 years, but I'm still struggling.
Sure. Sometimes that asshole pretty good blue belt comes in and you're like, I gotta put this guy in his place, right? But it's one of those situations where you as you get better specifically at jiu-jitsu, it starts to not be as fatiguing per session, which is a really good thing, which means you get more high quality training. White belt first day will just throw up. Like if you threw up every day in jiu-jitsu, you just wouldn't do the jiu-jitsu for that much longer. So basically, for me, I don't expend as much energy as I used to in jiu-jitsu, so I can actually train more jiu-jitsu than I used to before. And with weights, as I mature more as an athlete, my technique improves, less ego in the weight room. I can actually stuff as many weight training sessions as I can. It's interesting. People will read like a sample of my week. Say, oh my God, you do 9 sessions of lifting and 4 of jiu-jitsu? Are you crazy? And then they'll watch a video of me lift, and they're like, how many reps from failure was that set? And I was like, 2 or 3.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask you,
right.
because I've been following you on Instagram, and there's a lot of videos that I can see that it's very light for you.
Sure. It's not that it is light for me, but I stop at a certain number of repetitions before technical failure. I don't grind almost at all in the gym. Why? Because if I don't have to grind, I'll just do another set. I'll rest and do another set. So my volume is pretty high, but I don't ever pour my emotions into my lifting, which allows my maximum recoverable volume to be higher, lets me be more productive. If your technique is really good, if you don't train with your ego, both in jiu-jitsu and in weights, you can train a lot more productively, and you get that much better. If you get too egotistical with either one of those, you're not going to be training much, and you'll probably get hurt more often.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen more than your share of jiu-jitsu injuries in which I should have tapped, but decided he was gonna. I don't know. I don't know what anyone's thinking about that.
Yeah. It's hard. I'm pretty sure it's because of the ego.
A lot of stuff.
Yeah. And the same thing. Why we get hurt in lifting weights and CrossFit and
for sure.
Everything, it's the ego, because we push it harder than we know that we should.
For sure. And interestingly enough, that there's a good point, know that we should. It's not just in the acute sense that the ego is a problem. So the ego is definitely a problem of like, someone's like, hey, do you want to deadlift 200 kilos or do you want to go for 205? And you should be doing 200. You're like, put 205 on the bar. Like, that's definitely a problem. Or, you look at the clock and there's 5 seconds on the clock and you're getting your arm pulled out and you're like, fuck this, I'm not tapping. Right? That's a bad idea. But what's also a bad idea is everyone has a maximum recoverable volume. Now it changes a little bit over time. It goes up and down based on how you sleep and you eat, but everyone has an average. Some people, when they first start to explore their volume landmarks, they start to find their MRV with how many sessions of jiu-jitsu they can do, and CrossFit, for example, they're going to have this idea that it's a certain number. And it's not that number, it's less. They're going to keep bumping into that number over and over just out of the hope that somehow they can recover. I've had numerous conversations with people that are like, yeah, man, I'm trying a high volume training again, and I'm trying to make it to jiu-jitsu 6 days a week. And I'm like, cool. How's your recovery? And they're like, I'm beat up, man. I don't know, man. I'm beat up. And I'm like, have you considered training less? And they're like, you don't get better training less, brother. And I'm like, yeah, you do.
Yeah, you do.
But
Actually,
nobody's telling you to quit the sport.
Yeah.
You won't get better training more than you can recover from. So I think something I struggled with in the sort of intermediate to advanced part of my career with bodybuilding was having this idea that I should be able to do this many sets per week. And then I couldn't. And I was like, no, I should be able to. But there's no such thing as should be able to. It is, can your body handle it? And if your body can't handle it, you do just a bit less, not more. So a lot of ego isn't just temporary, like, oh, I'm going to not give up this submission. A lot of ego is, I'm trying to train a total of 12 sessions per week, but I fucking know damn well my body caps out at 10. Why don't I just do 10 and save myself a lot of stress? It feels like you're defeating yourself. It feels like you're losing. But after 3 or 4 months of incredible training and winning your next tournament, training only 10 times a week, it sure doesn't feel like losing anymore. And then you see your friends or your training partners training too much and hitting the wall over and over. You look at them and you're like, man, I'm sure glad I'm not a fucking idiot like that person, like I used to be.
What do you say to people who say that there's no such thing as overtraining?
I don't even know what to say to people like that.
Yeah,
I have a very good scientific response, but
yeah, it's like, okay, you say there's no such thing as overtraining, but at the same time you're saying that, okay, the problem is under recovery.
Sure.
That's fucking the same thing.
It's the same side of the different sides of the coin.
Yeah.
So, if there's no such thing as overtraining, then why are you not in the gym 4 times what you could be?
Yeah.
Why do people who win Abu Dhabi and win IBJJF Worlds, why don't they train 80 hours a week? Can you imagine coming up to a jiu-jitsu practitioner saying, you train 80 hours a week? To be like, what the why would you do that? You would just die. And they'd be like, no, but there's no such thing as overtraining. They'd be like, oh, okay, right? I tend to find, just to put this out there so that it's recorded, is all biological systems have a finite capacity for recovery. There is always such a thing as overtraining. Just like a rocket has a certain maximum payload, after that it doesn't lift off the ground anymore, your body has a maximum amount of damage you can subject it to, and its recovery, it just won't exceed that damage, and you'll slowly break apart. There is such a thing as overtraining on a pure systems biology perspective. Just plain old, it just happens. That aside, what I tend to find, most of the people that say there's no such thing as overtraining have never trained sufficiently hard to discover that there really fucking is. If you've trained 10 sessions a week, 12 sessions a week, 18 sessions a week, multiple times, and you felt that darkness, that burden, that loss of athleticism, that loss of capacity over and over every time. You know the story of Icarus, who burned his wings getting close to the sun? If you've Icarused yourself about 10 times, you know fucking damn well there is overtraining, and you know to keep clear of that because it's not productive. But a lot of people who train 3 or 4 times a week are trying to be, egotistical, and they'll say things like, there's no such thing as overtraining. You're like, yeah, for you there's not, because you've never trained hard enough. But when you train hard enough, you understand there is such a thing as overtraining, and you know to avoid it. Or you train hard, you don't understand that you're overtraining, you don't know to avoid it, and then you eventually get hurt and you're out of the sport.
Exactly. How would you program strength training for a jiu-jitsu or MMA athlete?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I certainly don't train for strength in such a way that maximizes my jiu-jitsu performance, because I really just train for bodybuilding. But strength training for jiu-jitsu is actually brutally simple. 2 to 4 sessions per week, each one between half an hour and an hour each, focusing on the compound core strength and power producing movements. There's some periodization involved where you do some high volumes for a couple of months, and getting closer to competition, you would do more strength power movements. But basically, in jiu-jitsu, how much can you do for sets of 5 in the weighted pull-up? How much can you do in the close grip bench? How much can you power clean? if you tell me, hey, your next competitor has power cleaned 180 kilos, I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to roll with that guy.
Yeah.
He's close grip benched 150 for reps. He weighs 110 kilos, but he does 5 full pull-ups. You're like, ooh, that's gonna suck, right? Fundamentally, jiu-jitsu is about putting yourself in the optimal technical leverage advantage to use as little strength as possible to get done what you need to get done. The thing is, when you go up against another expert grappler, he's never going to give you that opportunity. So you're going to have to put your best technique and best strength against it. And the stronger you are, the better. It's funny, people say strength doesn't matter in jiu-jitsu. Very few people say that nowadays. We say, it's not about strength. Like, it's about technique and as much strength as you can have. It's like saying jiu-jitsu is not about flexibility. It's about as much flexibility. It's about as much speed. You ever roll with someone and they're like, don't use your strength? My response is, don't use your speed. And they're like, well, what do you mean? Both of those are physical qualities.
Exactly.
So if you slow down, I'll stop grinding.
Yeah.
So for jiu-jitsu people, if you want to get strength training for jiu-jitsu, there's the science of what we should be doing, compound, heavy basics, blah, blah, blah. But putting the science aside, just real world. If you are on the opposite side of a mat of your next competitor and someone tells you, like, hey, that guy trains with weights, and you're like, okay, what does he do? And they're like, well, he does like this Bosu ball, split squat, balance shit. You're like, fuck that guy. I'm gonna double like that guy's goddamn hips off his body. Head's gonna pop off. But if someone's like, hey, that guy over there, he can deadlift 600 pounds for sets of 5. You're like, well, he can what?
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with that guy? Like, if he just decides he doesn't want to be in mount, he just goes, like, people just fly off, right?
I know, I've tried that. There's a story I used to teach in Australia, MMA and jiu-jitsu, and in Melbourne, the Melbourne Storm, so it's a professional rugby team, and they came in and trained wrestling with us once a week, and they were so fucking athletic that it didn't matter. I'm pretty good at jiu-jitsu, so I know where to keep beginners and how to keep them down, but the athleticism of them, they were just throwing me off.
Yep, just explode. Yep.
I was like, what the fuck am I going to do here?
And now imagine if you have someone who knows all the jiu-jitsu and trains properly so that they're that fast and that strong. Buchecha is a good example of that. I mean, there's a guy who weighs 240 pounds and can move like he weighs 120. What is the answer to that? Well, there's only one answer to that, and that's
Tap
Roger
out.
Gracie. Roger Gracie is the only answer to that
that's
so
true,
far.
that's true.
So, everyone else's
answer
answer
would
is
be-
tap out.
yeah.
Or just before the match, be like, I tap.
Thanks.
Right? So I think people in jiu-jitsu, they get a little too fancy with their weight training. They want the latest tools, balance balls, and all this bullshit. What they really need to be doing is getting fancy with their technique and keeping their training hardcore, brutal, simple. How much can you push? How much can you pull? How much can you squat? How much can you pull with your legs and clean? You get someone who can do the compounds well, explosively, with good full range of motion technique. I have to mention that. People go in the bench press for jiu-jitsu and they bench like this. Hey, Dickhole, what if I take you and put you in an Americana? How are you going to get out of that one?
Exactly.
You had better be able to shoulder press from here. You had better do a skull crusher from here. Jiu-jitsu puts you in very awkward positions. Here's another example. People don't do pull-ups all the way up and down. So when they do a pull-up, they'll stop right here instead of going all like this. If you shoot a double leg and someone sprawls on you, where are you pulling from? All the way out.
Exactly.
You had better be, jiu-jitsu had better make you strong in all of the weirdest possible ways. Your weight training has to complement that. So full range of motion, compound basics, sets of 5, mostly 5 to 10 reps. Get just meat and potatoes, painfully strong, inconveniently strong.
I would add to that, because I find that many jiu-jitsu and MMA practitioners, they have very weak glutes and hamstrings. I would just add a little bit of bodybuilding movements for that.
For sure. And also just stiff-legged
upper
deadlifts
back,
and stuff like that.
Upper back,
Yep.
stuff like that.
Because how can you posture out of a move? Well, is your upper back strong? If you're rolling with someone and you can fold them, that's bad news for them. But if they can pop out of anything that they want, it's real bad news for you. And a lot of people think strength training makes you inflexible. That's totally wrong, first of all. Second of all, strength training doesn't even need bodybuilding training. Yeah, I'm not super flexible because my muscles get in the way, but sets of 5 in the compound movements, if you eat normally, you'll still be the same size. You'll just be stronger. You'll have all the flexibility and the strength too. Sooner or later, decades from now, everyone in jiu-jitsu will do compound basic movements. But it's a cool opportunity now because a lot of people do bullshit, right? Even at pretty high levels. It's a good opportunity for those of us that know what we're doing to coach other athletes and ourselves into being very strong because we have a competitive edge. I know a bunch of guys, friends of mine, specifically from Kansas City Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and from Balance and where I train now, they train with weights and they do it properly. They go to Worlds and Pan Ams and beat people more technical than them because they're fucking strong.
Yeah, can't go wrong
and,
with
you know,
strong.
and the thing, for sure, right? And there's a certain level of heartbreak that is excellent to see on someone's face who knew they were more technical than you but lost on strength.
Yeah.
They walk out of that match like, and
It's
the coach is
just
like,
as
well, you
strong.
should have.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't know. I feel like nothing works. Like, well, you know, imagine if you got your technique good and your strength good.
Exactly. Hey man, we're running out of time here. Just tell our viewers where they can find you. All this. We didn't get to talk about Renaissance periodization.
No
We should
worries.
do
I got
that.
the shirt anyway.
Yeah.
That's good enough. So
Go find it out. It's the best
Word,
source
thank
for
you so much.
information. I mean, and I'm talking about evidence-based
For sure,
information, not
for sure.
bullshit. No,
yeah,
no
we
bull.
don't have any bullshit to sell,
Yeah.
unfortunately. We're trying to think of some good bullshit, but we can't come
yeah,
up with any. We're
I
just
have
very
some good
uncreative.
ideas.
There you go. We'll hire you. Bullshit expert. Bullshit
exactly,
consultant. So renaissanceperiodization.com, RP Strength on Instagram, and it's really good resources. We have a whole online university with RP Plus and all the questions answered. We now have a diet app, the RP Diet. It's on the Google Play Store and on the iPhone Store, the Apple Store. I was one of the main designers for the app, and it basically runs your entire diet for you. You pick all your favorite foods. It tells you how many to eat, how many meals. It reminds you about your meals, and it auto-adjusts your plan to make sure that you meet whatever weight goal you have. So it's like $15 a month, and the first 2 weeks are free. That's pretty cool. And Yahoo,
that sounds good.
Yeah.
Right on. All right, you have to get to your lecture. You're holding a lecture
Super.
in a
Yep.
few minutes,
Yep.
actually. So we have to get going.
Yep.
Thanks for making me a star in America.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll see you guys later. Remember to check out ALFALAND. Remember to check out RP Strength. Give us lots of likes and share our videos. Thank you.